They came on dreams, the immigrants, to build a nation.
Observe the laws of Canada. And fulfill my duties as a Canadian citizen.
We had Victor, Mary, Clara, then Norm, George, Bill, then myself. Esther was the 8th. 4 boys and 4 girls.
I found his name in some musty old books in the City of London archives. Lem Wong. He'd come to Canada at the turn of the last century, the same year as my grandfather, Quang Loc. Lem Wong started out scrubbing the shirts of miners in Sydney, Nova Scotia. 50 years later, he's working behind the cash register of his restaurant in London, Ontario. Some would say that's not much of a journey, but Lem's success was measured by his character, the love for his children. They grew into draftsmen, businessmen, doctors, lawyers. He laid the foundation for a new generation. I can reach into the past, but I cannot touch Lem Wong. I can only guess. I can only follow the contours of our shared experience. Lem Wong arrived in Vancouver aboard this vessel in 1897. It was part sailboat, part steamer. The officers were white, the crew Chinese. The trip from Hong Kong took him 3 weeks, and Lem Wong traveled steerage. They say he left China because his father gambled away the family fortune, leaving his widowed mother destitute. He came with an uncle, and his occupation was officially recorded as woodcutter. He was 16 years old and paid a head tax of $50. Lem and his uncle stepped off the boat into a frontier city. Vancouver had been incorporated just 10 years before. Even at this age, Lem admired frugality and sobriety.
And the first thing he did was to seek out the church. And the people took him in, and the teachers there taught him English. And so from then on, he was able to communicate.
Chinese people had been living in Vancouver long before Lem Wong arrived. They grew vegetables, cleared land, and worked the shingle mills and salmon canneries. Lem and his uncle learned the laundry trade.
At that time, the collars were detachable so that the men could get more wear out of their shirts, and it would be these collars that would be sent in for laundering. The laundry would only get 2 or 3 cents per collar that they washed, and this was a horrible job to do because, as you know, collars absorb a lot of oil and dirt, and it's hell to clean. But so the Chinese laundrymen had to scrub them with brushes. They would bleach them, they would boil them, put them through grinding, sort of washer grinders, trying desperately to get these collars clean.
The life of a Chinese laundryman was short. Many died in their 30s, suffering from malnutrition and overwork. The old Chinese used to say, they work so hard, they wash their laundry with tears. Images from popular culture clearly show the fear and misunderstanding of Chinese people.
Things like this can't happen.
Ah, you do not know the Oriental mind. It is steeped in the wisdom of the ages. Things do happen. We have seen.
The answer will be simple when we find it. A great screen of mysticism to cover up some ghastly traffic in human souls.
Chinese Canadians were portrayed as being lazy or morally corrupt. Yet at the same time, they were accused of mysteriously competing with white workers. Such sentiments gave rise to malicious legislation that disenfranchised Chinese Canadians and demanded head taxes from Chinese immigrants. By 1923, all Chinese immigration was completely halted. After 5 months in Vancouver, Lem said goodbye to his uncle and headed off alone to seek his fortune. Sometimes he passed Chinese railway workers. Typically, he went as far as he could go, traveling from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean. When he got to Sydney, Nova Scotia, he washed the clothes of steel mill workers. Lem Wong worked 14 hours a day. On Friday, when the soiled laundry came piling in, Lem worked right through until Saturday night. He was paid $4 a week, less than half the salary of an unskilled laborer.
He didn't tell us his life was easy, but he didn't impress upon us how hard it was for him. He never seemed to want to give us that feeling that he suffered, although I'm sure that there were a lot of incidents that would have been hurtful to him.
You're being watched.
Ah,
When you and Clara graduated from medical school, there was a story in the paper. And then we got this letter from this, don't even remember his name, from Spring Hill, Nova Scotia, with the picture of Dad and the bicycle, saying that he had met Dad when Dad wanted to be a 6-day bicycle rider, and there was this bicycle.
This is the earliest photograph of Lem Wong. Only 5'1", his compact frame is deceiving, for this is a young man with stamina and determination. In the 1890s, 6-day bicycle races were all the rage. The races were brutal tests of physical endurance. Although he was never a champion, Lem Wong did take home prize money. Prize money from racing put Lem's savings over $100. 5 years after arriving in Sydney, he finally had enough money saved for a round-trip ticket to China to find a wife.
They had an arrangement for him to marry this girl, and he went through a village and he saw my mother.
And once he saw her, he said, "That's the one for me."
So he went home and told his mother he wasn't going to marry the one they had chosen for him. And she says, "Oh, you can't do that, we'll lose face." So he said, "I just said I won't get married then." And so they broke down and he married my mother.
To reduce the Chinese Canadian population, laws were created to hinder Chinese women from immigrating.
My mother couldn't come in unless my father was a merchant. And to become a merchant, you had to sell services over the counter. You couldn't be a laundryman or own a restaurant.
Undaunted, Lem satisfied the letter of the law. He opened a poultry store, and when that failed, he finally succeeded with a fruit and vegetable store.
And qualified as a merchant and brought my mother out. And at that time, I believe the head tax for women was something like $1,000, and he never could have been afforded to pay it. For some reason, she had her feet bound, and that meant in China that either you had a lot of money, and which they didn't have, so she must have had some other quality that they felt was worthwhile binding her feet, because that was a sign of esteem. Which now has been outlawed in China for many years, because it was a very cruel thing to do.
Oh, it was pathetic to watch her walk. shuffle. I never did, I don't think I ever did see her feet bare, so I'm not sure just what they look like.
He had my mother's feet unbound so that she could walk. She had difficulty with her feet, but if her feet had continued to be bound, she wouldn't be able to walk very well.
Lem was a man of open heart and open mind. He believed that women and men should have the same opportunity. Of his 4 daughters, Mary and Clara became doctors, Greta became a lawyer, and Esther was a biochemist.
Girls weren't encouraged to go on to post-secondary school, and Dad certainly encouraged all of us to go as far as we wanted to go.
All except me.
Yeah.
I had to get out and work.
In his earlier travels across Canada, Lem had been impressed with London, Ontario. He decided to settle there with his wife and his oldest son, Victor. After years as a partner in a laundry, in 1914, he ventured into a new business and opened Wong's Cafe.
Wong's restaurant was double the size of what you will see today. The premises here, of course, is being changed over here. It's supposed to use it as a sitting room or as a dining room, whatever the case may be.
There was linen tablecloths on the tables. They had silver cutlery, teapots, cream and sugar, things like that, and finger bowls on the tables. The waiters all went to New York to train to hold the trays up over their heads so that they could carry everything there and then bring them down and put them on the tables. And of course, I was too young to know any about this, but that was the heyday of the restaurant.
At that time, I would say there must have been probably 11 bands our size or larger in London. And I think that came from the fact that Lombardos came from London. And I think a lot of us, when we were kids, we wanted to be Lombardos.
They opened the dance floor there where Guy Lombardo was supposed to have started, with maybe his 2 brothers or something.
And on Friday night, we would usually broadcast from CJGC, and we'd have a master of ceremonies come in. He would say, like, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and direct from Wong's Cafe in London, we bring you the music of Ken Sullivan and his orchestra." And then he'd give us a downbeat, and then the band would start playing their theme song.
He just was able to think of these things to enhance his own business and to make it flourish. And where he got all this from, I don't know, because he only had a grade 4 education.
I always remember New Year's Eve at the restaurant. It was always booked up. I was the cashier then. Nobody got in and out without paying when I was there.
On the cash at the head of the stairs, I remember that, yeah. Where you paid your bill, and Lem would come out and greet you as you came up, of course.
He always remembered their names, their faces, and greeted them with open arms right at the door and escort them to the tables.
The Great Depression of the 1930s hit hard, and Lem Wong was forced to move his family into cramped quarters on the top floor of his cafe.
From here on used to be the living quarters. Used to be very small rooms which were partitioned up with a very heavy cardboard type of fiber. When we were ripping them down, we found a letter which Mr. Wong was asking for a loan, one of his relatives in Toronto for about $50. The letter must have been written around 1930 or 31.
We didn't really appreciate what my dad was going through at the time.
He struggled along and saw us through it. And then at that time, Mary and Claire were right at the height of going to school, and they had to get loans and things to help them.
On Christmas Day, organized by Reverend Beatty in conjunction with the Salvation Army, he would arrange with Dad to cook and serve a full-course turkey dinner with nuts, pudding, the whole bit.
The single men couldn't get any welfare, so this was a dinner for single men. And they used to come in on the hitchhiking on the rails and everything into London.
Lem was a man of uncompromising principles, fiercely just. He insisted that the homeless be served the same menu as his paying customers.
It was an awful lot of work. Working to get the restaurant into place the night before, working till 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and then getting up at 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning to come down and do the final touches, then serve the dinners, and then clean up, get ready for the regular Christmas dinner. But it was a trying weekend. And then came New Year's Eve on top of that.
As the Depression claimed other lives and dreams, Lem Wong managed to rebuild his business with quiet fortitude.
For a while, I would say my dad was like a phantom father. During the day, he'd be at work, and we'd be at school. And then after school, we'd come home, and he'd be still at work. Then about 8 o'clock, he would come home, check us kids out to make sure we were all okay, sit down for supper. He would go up and have an hour or so of rest. We would get ready for bed. While we were in bed, he'd be off back to the restaurant. So that was the only time we'd ever see Dad. It was at about 8 o'clock at night. But in the meantime, it was Mother that made sure we behaved. She was quick with the slippers off her feet. I don't think I ever saw Dad get mad. Did you?
Well, the only time, if he didn't like it, he used to kind of grind his teeth, and then you knew it was time to hide.
I saw him get mad. I was caught coming out of the movie when I should have been at school.
All right, yeah.
You knew when he didn't like what you did.
He would never become violent, though.
No.
He just hold himself.
Yeah.
That's why he got migraines.
No matter what his efforts and success, bruising stereotypes were all around him.
Just a minute. This is one time you won't get away before I speak to you.
No. We mustn't be seen talking. If we were caught, it would mean the end of everything for both of us.
But why? I don't understand. You're a white girl. What are you doing on a place like this?
A provincial law designed to protect the white population from corruption by Chinese Canadians made it illegal for Lem Wong to employ white women in his restaurant.
On parade at number 1 Repat Depot are a group of Chinese Canadians just in from the Far East. Specially trained for secret work behind Jap lines, they are interviewed by the Canadian Army newsreel.
How do you fellas like this cold weather?
Suddenly, the world changed. The faces of Chinese Canadians were now heroic.
Well, just what were you fellas doing down in India?
These boys are all in wireless and signal work, except Corporal Lee here, who's trained in demolition work.
During the war, when some of the Japanese were sent inland, and I remember him telling me about meeting some sitting on the, church lawn, and he went up to speak to them, and they weren't allowed to sit in the main part, and they weren't allowed to sing in the choir. And I think Dad spoke to the people at our church because he didn't think that was right, even though the Japanese were enemies at that time with the Chinese and Japanese. But he didn't think, you're a Christian, you accept everybody, and you treat them equally.
Now, well, just exactly what's this flash then?
Although the majority of these Canadians were denied the vote, Lem's sons Bill, George, and Norman served in World War II and wore their uniforms proudly.
At least you all speak Chinese. Why, definitely. What the dickens does that mean? Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
The war was over and I was on the way home. I would be coming home. He wrote and said he had another restaurant ready to go. And I wrote back and said, Dad, I don't want any part of a restaurant. And I guess I broke his heart.
Norm became a draftsman. Lem's number 1 son, Victor, joined him in the new restaurant. Lem and Toy Wong both lived to their 98th year, doted on by their children and grandchildren. There is something completely unwavering about Lem Wong and his determination to better himself. The humiliations meted out to Chinese Canadians of his generation never seemed to make him bitter or twisted by anger. Instead, they only served to heighten his sense of principle. Whether something was Chinese or Western didn't seem to matter to Lem Wong. What mattered was what was right or wrong. He always used to say, "You should take only the best of both worlds."